Hey, we have started a series called Questions. It's actually kind of one of my favorite ones. I've been doing this for the last couple years, asking you guys for questions a couple months ago, and you had sent out questions like, hey, what about such and such? Some of them I've been able to put messages on. Some of them are just a little too large. I would need months and weeks to be able to flesh it out. But anyway, this is one of the questions that I received, and that is, how does the blended family work? So let me give you a couple little statistics to kind of think about. I mentioned this last week, and I'll mention it again. This pastor doesn't function in a fake reality. The reality is we live in a world where blended families are all around us and in the church, and we love them. And our desire is to prepare them to be the best blended family that honors God that we can possibly do. And so oftentimes we'll get into, well, if divorce wasn't so easy and all this other stuff, it's like, well, great. I mean, that's wonderful. But the problem is that we can't hit rewind and go back. We are dealing with the here and now, right? And we need to address it, and we need to speak about it. I think not to encourage our folks and to help them to become all that God wants them to be is kind of just being ignorant to the reality that there are blended families all over the place, and we'll read you some statistics, and you may be surprised. They are all over the place in the church and out in the community as well. So 75% of every person who divorces statistically gets remarried, okay? If they're younger, the percentage goes up, but the reality is if you're sitting here divorced today, you have a 75% chance of getting remarried. And by the end of the service, we'll find the right person for you today, all right? 43% of everyone who goes down to the county office to get a marriage license are from a blended family, or at least one of the two have been previously married. So 43% of all marriages today is one of the two, if not both, is in either the second marriage or third or so forth. Okay? So that's a large number. 65% of all remarriages have children involved. Okay? Adolescent, teenagers involved. And of course, a higher percentage have adult children, and some of the stuff we talk about today actually has that in it. According to 2014 Pew Research, in 1960, only 13% of marriages were a second or remarriage. Today, as I said, 43%. So just in 40 some odd years, we've seen a huge kick up in the number of folks who are remarrying. Okay, so just to kind of today, you're going to sit on my couch and I'm going to do counseling with you today. So this is kind of the evolution for me. About 16, 17 years ago, when I'm a senior pastor, I started having counseling with some folks, postmarital counseling, and I started recognizing a trend that many of them were in a second marriage or third marriage, and they were a blended family. And at that point in my ministry, there was not a lot of parachurch organizations or ministries out there that was doing anything in the way for blended families. It was kind of like silent. They were sitting in our churches all over America, but there wasn't anything to give us any help or direction on how do we help the folks become successful in blending these families together. And so through my little journey and just kind of trying to figure it out on my own, I started seeing some trends that I would recognize in some of the families, and some stumbling blocks that would begin to repeat in different families. And then through the years, we've started seeing some parachurch organizations come in, some ministry organizations come in to help with the blended family, giving some great input and advice. And there are some wonderful blended family ministries out there that will kind of help you sort through the situation and the issues that we wrestle with. So I started this like 17 years ago, part out of necessity, and then through the years have kind of grown and kind of shaped and molded, and recognized there's probably about 4 or 5, 6 areas that tend to surface in the majority of the blended families that we wrestle with and that we work with in our life. Now, one of the early guys who wrote a book on the blended family describes it this way. Because when you think about the blended family, it sounds so neat and so clean, right? I mean, we're just going to take this family, and we're going to take this family, and we're just going to blend them together. And don't they all fit, and isn't it wonderful? And that's the mindset that folks have. But that isn't the reality. So he describes it this way. He says it's like taking a jigsaw puzzle, 1,000-piece, 500-piece jigsaw puzzle, shaking up the pieces, dumping them on the floor, throwing the cover of the picture away, putting blindfolds on the adults, and say, put it together. See, when we think about that, we think, yeah, but he's only got 2 and I got 1. I mean, that's 3. What's the big deal? Well, you have values. You have personality traits. Some of you got more than one personality. It's a whole nother message, right? You have a culture in your home. He has or she has a culture in their home. You have multiple components coming into this. It isn't 2 kids, 1 kid, blend them together and it's all good. It's complicated. But see, when we first begin to move into the blended family, we don't think that way. Because we have allowed our heart to take control. I love him. I love her. I found the best you wouldn't believe, Pastor Dan. Right? And we allow our heart to take over, and as a result of it, we're not facing, and that's the term I'm going to use today, we're not facing the issues of the complexity of a blended family. Okay? And I think we do a disservice to our families when we just want to kind of put a ribbon on it, put a little whipped cream and say, hey, it's all good, love Jesus, go for it. Because the reality is, most blended families struggle. Most blended families take 4 to 7 years to blend together. Most blended families last 3 years. They never get to that blending experience. They throw up their hands and they call it good. Okay? So they're not even able to get to that time in their life where they sync up and where they begin to run in a way with some type of rhythm. 27% of Americans live in what's a traditional home. 73% of Americans today live in either a single family or a blended family environment. Okay? So that is a reality. I think, again, the church can be silent. We can talk about if Elvis Presley wasn't born and we didn't have rock and roll music and all this other stuff. Okay, if that's where you want to live, go have fun. I live in a reality where we live in an area where 73% of Americans live in either blended family or single family homes. What can we do as a church to assist them to become all that God wants them and to be healthy in their walk? That's the mindset that this pastor has. How do we help them to do that? So pull out your outline. You ready? Sitting on my couch. And today's counseling is free. Brought to you by... We got to laugh a little bit. Number 1 is facing disillusionment. One of the first things you got to do when you enter into the blended family or you begin to think about the blended family is you got to face the reality. You got to get out of the pretend landville and you need to look at not the illusion of what you're hoping for it to be, but the reality of what it really is going to be. And when you face, and that's why I used on each of the 4 points, I used the word face because I think there is a time in the relationship where you need to pull off the blinders and that you need to face the reality of the dynamic of that particular relationship and how it's going to play out and how it's going to go. Here's how the majority of blended relationships work, okay? You divorce the other person. Whew, what was I thinking? And you find Mr. Right or Mrs. Right, and you can't wait to tell everybody how wonderful he is compared to, and how wonderful she is compared to, right? And you allow your heart to take control in the relationship. And I'll hit pause and say this. Even if you're going into a relationship and you've never been married, this is also a danger as well. And so you allow that heart to begin to take over. And you believe that just because you got a legal divorce, that relationship is over. It's done. Put a fork in it. Call her good, because now I'm just going to grab the little crumb crunchers under my arm, and I'm going to go off with Mr. Right or Mrs. Right, and we're going to start a new family, and everything is going to be wonderful. The problem is, if you have children with that last, okay, and you can use whatever word you want to use, you are never separated from them. There will be birthdays, there will be weddings, there will be graduations, there will be baptisms, confirmation, whatever you want to, Christmases, Thanksgiving, and you are going to be connected to that. A remarriage does not dissolve the past, it does legally. It simply reorganizes the new relationship. Okay? So the connection is going to continue. So the person going into the new blended family, they think, done, praise Jesus, I'm out of that, and they move into that thinking that. And a short time later, they recognize, no, he may not be married to her, but we're still dealing with her. She may not be married to him, but we're still dealing with him. And there's a connection. And you have to just face that reality. And you have to recognize that it's part of it. But to go in with blinders thinking that everything is just going to be perfect, it's not going to be. And a short time after you say, I do, it's going to begin to unravel, and you're going to wonder, what happened? Now, here is a sign, a warning sign, that if you said it or thought it, you need to be cautious if you're entering into a blended family, or you maybe perhaps are and you're wondering how come you're having trouble. Here is the warning sign. When you say or when you think, I deserve to be remarried. Because what that statement is saying is, you're allowing your heart to fill the loneliness that you're experiencing. And when you allow your heart to fill the loneliness that you're experiencing, every red flag, every yellow flag, every buddy that comes into your life and goes, dude, what are you thinking? He's not as nice as you think he is. All those warning signs, you don't even pay any attention to it. Want to know why? But I love him. But I love her. I mean, his feet don't even stink. Right? And that's the reality. And that's because you live in kind of this disillusionment of what you think is going to be, and you have unrealistic expectations, and you have to just be very cautious of that. Okay? So, can blended families work? Absolutely. Some of our closest friends are, and it's worked out. It was a little bumpy for some of them at first, but they were able to get into sync and work it through, and it's working fine. So it's doable, but you got to pull the blinders off, and you need to begin to face the reality of the dynamics within that relationship and how it's going to be. Number 2 is facing real issues, okay? You have to face the real issues that are going to be involved in that particular relationship. Now, in Proverbs, it says this, in Proverbs 24, verse 3, it says, homes are built on foundation, okay? And let me just kind of explain to you how I explain this in counseling. Homes are built on the foundation of wisdom, you can circle that word, and understanding, okay? So here's what I say wisdom is. Wisdom is what to do and what not to do, okay? So homes are built on the foundation of wisdom, what to do and what not to do. Understanding is, it is when to do it and when not to do it. Okay, so get your mind around this. So, wisdom, know what to do and what not to do. Understanding, know when to do it and when not to do it. In a relationship, and this is true whether you've been married one time or multiple times, you need to become an absolute expert, if you're a guy, on your wife's temperament and personality traits. If you're a woman, your husband's temperamental and traits. I know you're saying, well, yeah, he's like 10% mental and whatever, however that joke works, right? And you need to become an expert on your children. Okay? You know Proverbs where it says, train up a child in the way he should go, and when you turn, he'll return to it. And everyone says, oh, that means drag your kid to church and he'll go to church his whole life. That doesn't mean that. It means that you are to understand your child's temperament and you are to teach them based on their temperament. All right? So you need to understand that. You need to be an expert. You need to have wisdom, what to do and what not to do. You need to have understanding when to do it and when not to do it. Okay? And that's true in any family and any relational type of situation. So let's take a look at a couple of real issues. Letter A is personalities. You're going to have multiple personalities in that mix, right? Now let me just share with you real quick. The biggest issue is not what you have in common. The biggest issue is what you have that are different. When I take a couple through, before I say I do in my premarital counseling, the reason why I selected that book 15, 16 years ago is it is written to discourage people from getting married and to surface any conflict in which they may have. If you love NFL football and your wife loves NFL football and you come to church in the early service and you race home and you have pennants all over your house and you hip hip hooray for these big old macho guys playing a kids game making a whole bunch of money and everybody loves football, right? Good for you. It's never going to be a problem. But you know where this is going, right? If you love football and your spouse cannot stand it, it's going to cost you a fortune. Because every time you're home watching your team, he or she is either at Home Depot or Macy's, right? Going for it. Right? Right? So what you're looking for is personality differences, not things that they have in common. Okay? That isn't as problematic as when there's differences in it. Letter B is traditions. You think there are multiple traditions in a blended family? There's multiple traditions in a family that's a traditional one, right? I mean, Tammy and I, we and I know what you guys, every time I mention my wife, you guys always think, how is she so lucky? I know that, you don't need to, but last week we celebrated 27 years, dog years. No. But you think when we came together 27 years ago, you don't think there were different traditions? Absolutely. So now take a blended family. There's multiple traditions, values, principles, ways of living, right? Who's going to go to where on Christmas? How do we work that out? If you got his kids and her kids, how are you going to do the holidays? I mean, he's got his here and she's got hers there, and how do you do all that stuff? Now, it's not impossible to do. It's just a reality that you have to look at those and sort through and figure out what the best way of dealing with it is. And then you have adult matters. And adult matters are multiple, and let me just go through them real quickly. The first one is achieving marital intimacy after being hurt. And this is one of the reasons why first marriages, 50% end in divorce. Second marriages, around 70% end in divorce. Third marriages, around 80% end in divorce. And I say this, it's the only thing that I can think of, the more you do, the worse you get. Think about that. The first time you rode a bike, hopefully the second time you rode a bike, you did it better. But marriage is the only thing, and maybe there's something else you guys can think about, but marriage is the only thing, the more you do it, the worse the statistic becomes. Why? Well, because you have intimacy issues, you got pains and hurts from the past relationship, from the past, that you've never worked through, and you've never gone through to be able to have the intimacy that's necessary in that relationship. And so in my mind, here's what I say. Your life is like a house. Okay? If you have hurts and pains in your life, you know what you do? Because you survive. This isn't like you're different. This is just the way we survive as humans. We close those areas off and we build up boundaries or we build up walls. So imagine, you got a 6-bedroom house, you got 5 kids, everyone needs a bedroom. But you've gone through your house and you've closed off 4 of those bedrooms. You just nailed them shut, put a sign on it, do not enter. Now your friends come over and you go, oh, this is a beautiful house, it's huge. 6 bedrooms, wow, 6 bedrooms, that's amazing. Yeah, but we only use 2. Why do you use 2? Oh, we nailed them up, shut 4 of them. Well, why should you have a big house then? Right? And that's what we do relationally. When we shut off areas of our life, we do not allow our new spouse to come into those areas and experience the intimacy that we need to have. And it's a way that we've protected ourselves from the past, but unfortunately we've kept those areas closed off as we begin to move forward in the new. And so it's something you have to really look at and work through. Spiritual integrity and church involvement. Oftentimes there's a bit of shame, there's a bit of embarrassment and those kinds of things. You need to make sure that you have discussed it with your new spouse and how that's going to work and who's going to be involved in what and those kinds of things. You need to work through those things. Integrating the family members together over time because, and here's what I heard, yeah, but when we went to the park, they got along so well. Well, when they move in to the house, it's a whole new dynamic. Going to the park and pushing your kid on a swing, who doesn't like that? Right? Having someone move in and then take over my toy box, problem. Right? And so you need to make sure that you're able to blend them together and integrate them in together. Dealing with ex-spouses, we don't have any of that, right? The good news is, this is so cool. After the service is over, I'm going to introduce you to 2 guys that I know. They bump people off for $50. Just kidding. You're like, 50? I got cash. They'll do it for 45 for cash, right? And we'll deal with that, a difficult spouse. Money management and financial autonomy. Here's one of the big issues that ends up happening. You get married, and this isn't about the judges. Don't hear me any of that, okay? But the new husband, right, has an ex-wife. She has child support from the last, and he has alimony from the last. I'm not saying right or wrong, okay? You want to argue about that? After service, you can go out the parking lot, argue all day long, okay? But here's what happens. A couple years into the marriage, the new wife says, we need to buy a new car. Yeah, let's go down and look at a car. Oh, we can't afford a car. Oh, why can't we afford a car? Well, I have alimony. I'm tired of paying your ex-wife. I can't even do blah, 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 blah because of your ex-wife, right? Now, hey, I'm not here to say that's wrong or right and the judges are favored, blah, 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 okay? I know some of you guys want to argue that with me. I'm just saying that's a reality that you need to look at and you need to recognize going in that there's child support and there's alimony. It may not be fair, it may not be right, I may agree with you. But if the court said it, that's where you're at. And you have to just deal with that and understand that in the sense as the new family comes together and you begin to have the money management issues. All right? Am I getting close so far? Nervous. 3, facing the biggest issue that causes divorce in blended families, and it is parenting. That is the biggest issue that causes divorce in blended families, is the parenting issue, okay? Now, right underneath there, look what it says. It is more difficult on a child when a remarriage occurs than when the divorce occurred. Okay? Get your mind around that. Because, think about it. As the adult, you're like, I found Mrs. Right. I found Mr. Right. Man, you are excited. Your kids aren't. You're riding on the mountain. They're in the ground. And here's why. Because they recognize that reconciliation isn't going to happen. That's what they recognize. So they come to terms that mom and dad aren't going to come back together. They were hopeful all along. But when there's the new I do, and we walk in here and we do the little thing in church, and we turn around and walk out, for the kid, that's devastating. The younger they are, the harder it is for them to process. Okay, as they get older, it's a little easier for them to process. But the younger that they are, the more difficult it is. So just think about this. You're on cloud 9, honeymoon, new honey, I'm going to retire, we're going to get a motor home, we're going to drive all over the world, it's going to be great, all this stuff. The kid is thinking, great, now I got to share my bedroom with an alien. And he or she is going to come in, and they're going to slobber, use, touch, break all my stuff. Right? And so when they move in, that's exactly how the child feels. That there is an alien who's just invaded my house. But at the park, they got along so well. Yeah. You want to know why? Because at the end of the park day, you said, high five, Joey, goodbye, buddy, we'll see you next week. You got in the car, he got in his car, you went this way, it was all good. You didn't show up at Joey's room. And you didn't bring your little crumb cruncher and go, hey, Joey, he's going to play in your toy box. Joey's like, oh, no, he isn't. There's an alien in here, Mom. And then they start acting out toward the new blended family, right? And everyone's like, wow, what's going on? And so we just need to recognize that that is a huge part of the dynamic of beginning to try to blend them together. It takes time. 4 to 7 years for a family to blend together. 3 years is the average that most blended families work. Okay? So it takes time to blend them together where they begin to work. Okay? Then you add in, letter A in your outline, is parenting by guilt. Anybody know what that is? Let's see hands. How many of you know what parenting by guilt is? Okay? So here's parenting by guilt. Parenting by guilt equates discipline with pain. So they think that's one and the same. And so because our marriage blew up, and because little Joey doesn't have a dad now, and I got to take him over to dad, and he just sees him a couple times a week, and he's gone through all these horrific things and separation anxiety, and he cries, I want my dad, and right, all that kind of stuff, which is natural. When it comes to disciplining Joey, I don't want to do that because I've already put him through enough pain. So I'm just going to allow him to do his own thing. Okay? And by the way, this can also happen in a traditional family as well. This isn't just blended families. This can also be in traditional families as well. Proverbs chapter 3, verse 11, if we skip down. It says, my son, do not despise the Lord's discipline, and do not resent his rebuke. Well, why not? Verse 12, because the Lord disciplines those he loves. Right? Those he loves, he disciplines. So when we do not discipline our child, according to Scripture, it shows not a love for them, but it shows a lack of love for them. Right? And so we need to recognize. So you bring in this parenting by guilt where we've equated pain. He's already gone through enough heartache in his life. The last thing I need to do is go in there and tell him he can't. And we parent that way, it begins to have problems and strain in the relationship as it begins to move forward. Letter B, it gets worse, right? The step-parent's involvement. So you take parenting by guilt and you add in kind of what is the role of the new step-parent, and we don't know what the rules are, we're not sure what the terms of engagement are, and you have a mixture that's going to be an absolute disaster. And so, here's the way it plays out, all right? The mom is in the bedroom with little Joey. If your little kid's named Joey, he's an angel, all right? So little Joey's in the room, and he's mad, and he's throwing his stuff, and I hate you, I wish you were never, all this other stuff. And it devastates Mom. And Mom comes out of the room, and she's like, I cannot control that guy. He is off the hook. New honey, stepdad, you need to go in there, and you need to give him the business. New stepdad says, I could do that. Walks in the room, sits down on the bed with little Joey and go, listen, first of all, you're not going to treat your mom that way. That's not showing respect. Okay. Number two, because you disrespected your mom, you're on restriction, you're losing your allowance, and you can't go to the water park with your friend. Right? The whole bit, right? Stepdad comes out of the house, out of the room, says to the new wife, hey honey, got it? Well, what'd you do? I said, he's losing his allowance, he's on restriction, and he can't go to the water park. Oh, good. Wait a minute, what? Because remember, running in the background, parenting by guilt. You did what? Put him on restriction, took his allowance away, said he can't go to the water park. Oh, man, that's harsh. If that was your kid, I don't think that you'd be doing that. I think that you would allow, in fact, I think you would have gave him $40, not $20 for his allowance, and you'd have took him to Disneyland, not just the water park. And so, Mom goes in, little Joey's room, sits down on the bed and says, honey, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry you're hurting. Mr. whatever his name is, stepdad, he overreacted. And so, I'm sorry that he did that. You're not on restriction. You'll get your allowance. In fact, I'm going to buy you a season pass to the water park, all right? Because you're such a good kid, right? And so I want to make sure your heart's happy. Is your heart happy? My heart's happy, Mom, because I'm running the show here and you don't know it, all right? Whoops, did I say that? Did that come out? Right? So then stepmom walks out and has a conversation with Dad. Typically it doesn't go well. Fast forward a week, a day, an hour, a month, little Joey goes off the hook again, right? Stepmom says, I can't handle it. I'm tired of him. He said, I hate you, and right? You need to go in there. Stepdad sits on the couch and goes, I ain't going in there. Well, I might as well be a single parent. I'm back to parenting all by myself. You don't show me support. You don't follow. You don't got my back, blah, blah, blah. And I say this to couples. How many times would you like him to put his foot in it? See, you're only going to put your foot in it so many times. And so think about the dynamics here. So what ends up happening is, step-parent, right, who put his foot in it, he withdraws. The new wife feels like she doesn't have the support, and you start having a division amongst the two. Okay? Now, that is true in a traditional family as well. That isn't just for blended families. And so, I say you've got to write down the grounds of engagement or the ground rules. Yeah, but we had a talk. I don't care about talks. Because my experience with talks is I'm like, what did she say? Didn't she say? No, she didn't. Yeah, right? And you have a whole different memory of what the conversation was. And so you need to make sure that you have the ground rules of what it is that you want the new spouse, the new step parent to do. Whether it's in being involved or not being involved, that's totally up to you, but you need to have some type of ground rules. Otherwise, you're just going to create problems in your relationship. Parenting and co-parenting, you need to be on the same page, which is what I just said. You need to make sure that you have that all down and there's discipline that's handed out evenly across the board for all. Letter D is what about difficult exes, right? And we never have any of that. We always have good stuff. Our exes are wonderful people, and we're so happy that someone else took them. I know some of you are like, he's a pastor and he says that stuff? I'm just parroting what you guys tell me on the phone. Romans chapter 12, verse 18, look what it says. If it is possible, as far as it depends on on you, live at peace with everyone. Okay? Translation. There are some people it's not going to be possible to live at peace with. Verse 19. Do not take revenge, my friend, but leave room for the Lord's wrath, for it is written, it is mine to avenge, I will repay, says the ex-spouse. Says who? Says the Lord. Okay? So, listen. It is not okay to visualize what you would like the Lord's wrath to be on your ex. As appealing as that may be, okay, it is sinful for you to do that. That is between them and God. And you say, well, Dan, why is that a big deal? Because if you focus on it, you're inviting that same kind of attitude and action into your current relationship, right? And so what ends up happening is you spend a lot of your time and energy trying to think of a way to repay your ex versus working on your current relationship and making it better, right? So let the Lord take care of His business, and you just need to stay focused not on the payback part, but on moving forward in the current relationship that you're currently in, and you don't have to worry about how wonderful and all this other stuff. Just recognize them. Let me just say this on a side note. If they were controlling in your marriage the first time, they will be controlling in your divorce. And they will control you in one of two ways. They will control you financially, or they will control you with your kids. So just know it. If they were controlling in that relationship, they're going to do the same thing. Don't be shocked. And some of you who've called me, I've asked you this question. Are you surprised they're doing it? And you're like, no. I said, okay. Then understand that. Don't be surprised that they're doing it. Just recognize that that's who they are in the relationship, okay? And I lead into this, okay? Oftentimes in it, I want to say as a pastor who loves you guys, to say, you're an adult. Grow up and get over it, right? And here's why. If you imagine that your child has dual citizenship, they have an allegiance to this country, aka your home, and they have an allegiance to this country, aka your ex's home. They have a dual alliance and a dual loyalty. For a child, even as an adult, it's hard to process how that affects them. How do I stay loyal to dad, and how do I stay loyal to mom? How does that work? The littler they are, the more complex it is, right? And so they have this dual allegiance, dual citizenship in the world, in their world, okay? Now, let's imagine this. Let's imagine that you have dual citizenship. You have citizenship in America, and you have citizenship in another country, say a third world country. That country has different economics, right? An economical situation. It has different values. It has different laws. It has different ways of doing things, right? And that child is going to have to figure out how this country works and how this country works. And if you have mom and dad warring at each other in a civil war, how much more complex is it for that child to sort through and process all that? There's an African proverb that says that when elephants are fighting, they are not concerned about the grass that they are trampling. And I think that proverb is true in many families. When the exes are warring against each other, who they're trampling on, they're not concerned about. But the reality is, it's their kid who's getting it. Because there is a dual loyalty, and they don't know how to live with a divided heart and a divided loyalty in their life. And so little comments like, your dad is always late. Now that may be completely true. But the reality is that child has a difficult time processing that because they're loyal to mom, they're loyal to dad, but there's a bigger issue. When they're late, they don't know how to process, what does that mean that I'm late too? Does that make me worse than Dad? And so they have a hard time processing it. And so oftentimes as pastor, I'll say to the adults, hey, grow up, man. Get over it. This is your bed. You just got to figure out the best way to do it. And to sit and complain and gripe is not going to get you very far down the road. And then the last one. Number 4, facing God's grace. Okay? Facing God's grace in your life. And this is where I think is probably the most important. Oftentimes in blended families, there's shame, there's guilt, there's a lot of different negative emotions that they go through. And as a result of that, they push back from God's grace. God can't love me. Well, why can't He love me? Well, I'm divorced. And they push back. I've been divorced twice. And they push back. And they push back from God's grace. And I think it's important that we understand that in Romans chapter 5, and just going to the last part, it says, God demonstrated His own love for us, that while we were perfect, He died for me. Is that what it says? While we were sinners, He died for me. Right? And this is why it's the most important. The only way any relationship is going to work, whether it be a blended family or traditional family, is that you're healthy physically, emotionally, and more importantly, spiritually in your life. And if you resist God's grace and you push back from God's grace because of guilt, because of shame, because I'm embarrassed, because no one in my family got a divorce and I'm the only one that ever got a divorce, that kind of thing, and you push back from God's grace, you are not where you need to be spiritually in your life. And the only way any relationship is going to work is when a person is spiritually where they need to be. And so that becomes the biggest area of working. If you're where you need to be spiritually, you can work through these other issues and these other areas. Can blended families work? They can. Can they succeed? Absolutely. Some of our closest friends have wonderful relationships, wonderful families. It is incredibly possible, but it is difficult, and it takes work, and it takes perseverance in it. So some of you probably are sitting here and you're like, why did I come today? I would be willing to bet you that maybe you don't have a blended family, but one of your siblings do. A coworker does. And my experience has been, blended families, they can put on the prettiest faces and everybody looks wonderful. But if you peel it away, boy, this is all where they're at, and they're struggling. And you have a great opportunity to minister to them. Let's pray.